How did the United States treat prisoners of war during World War II? The deplorable conditions in which soldiers captured and taken to prison camps in Germany, the Soviet Union and the Far East lived are well known. To be taken prisoner by Germans, Japanese or Soviets was equivalent to spending months and even years subjected to all kinds of mistreatment. But for prisoners held in the United States, the situation was completely opposite. During World War II, the United States housed more than 400,000 German prisoners of war and 100,000 more Japanese and Italians. These were undoubtedly the prisoners of war best treated during the war. They were proof of the humanitarian character of the Americans and their adherence to the laws that govern a civilized society, even during a war. Their rights were always respected, as stipulated in the Geneva Convention. They were treated with dignity, were well fed, and were provided with adequate medical care. From those same dates, it was already known that they would enjoy better treatment there, and that is why huge numbers of Germans already defeated in battle tried to move enough to surrender to the Americans and not to the Soviets. Why were there so many German prisoners of war in America? For geographical reasons, as it was a matter of taking them away from Europe, thus minimizing the chances that they would escape and return to the German ranks because, as it is known, the first duty of a prisoner of war is to try to escape. As expected, during those years labor began to become scarce, as men enlisted in the armed forces. Then someone proposed that the prisoner soldiers be employed to work on farms and factories throughout the United States, as a way to make up for the deficit. However, they faced three problems: the Americans' own distrust of employing enemy soldiers, the possibility of mass escapes, and the rules of the 1929 Geneva Convention, which only authorized the work of prisoners of war if their health allowed it, if it was safe, if it was not related to the war, and if it was paid. The authorities analyzed everything and decided to employ them in various labor fields. Thousands of German prisoners were assigned to factories, construction work, farms of all kinds, wheat, beetroot, corn, etc., and any other place where they were needed and could work with the minimum safety. The initial distrust of the employers was diluted over time. In compliance with the Geneva Convention, prisoners received pay and could also buy products in the camps: chocolate, ice cream, Coca-Cola, cigarettes, and other items. In addition to receiving food, clothing, showers, and decent beds, they were able to play sports and attend English classes, have access to books and board games, and some theatrical performances that made days in the camps away from their families less difficult. Under these conditions, escape attempts were practically insignificant. Less than 1% of prisoners attempted to do so, and most of them were quickly apprehended. The Americans became familiar with the captives and understood that, apart from a few fanatics of Nazism in Germany, the vast majority were young men who had been dragged into the war and who could not refuse to form the armed forces, since it was considered a duty to defend their homeland. By meeting them during daily interaction, Americans stopped seeing them as fierce enemies and understood that they were ordinary human beings with their fears, anxieties, feelings, qualities, and flaws. But above all, they knew that they were also fathers, sons, brothers, or husbands.
People thought of POWs as Nazis, but when you get to know people up close and understand their lives, everything changes.
At first, when they entered my establishment, and even though they were watched by our soldiers, I panicked and imagined them in their uniforms shooting at everyone they saw. A few months later, I recognized them by their names and became confident in sentimental matters. I must admit that I became fond of several of them, and I saw them almost as only boys.
Of course, the captives also left their testimonies.
Falling prisoner caused me a very deep depression. I felt as if I had lost the honor of a soldier. It was much worse when I was transferred to the United States. Only a few months later, I realized that it had been the best thing that had happened to me in the war. I came to see the US military in the camps, almost like colleagues. As a prisoner of war, I had a better life than my mother and sister in Germany. At the time of my capture, the first interaction I had with the American enemy was when a soldier approached me and he gave me a chocolate bar. In Germany, I had never tasted white bread. That was considered a luxury. When I arrived at the prison camp in Florida, on the first day with the meal, I was given a small loaf of white bread. I ate only a part of it and kept the rest as a treasure to taste little by little. But the next day, I was handed another loaf of bread. This left me very confused. On the third day, when they gave me another loaf of bread, I couldn't help but get my eyes watered. I was happy to be able to taste what was a delicacy for me, but at the same time, I understood that Germany had been defeated, since the Americans could feed their prisoners of war better than Germany could feed its soldiers.
There were also many cases in which living together led to feelings, not only between prisoners and local girls but also in families that practically adopted Germans as if they were their relatives. Of course, not everything was positive, and there were many Americans who distrusted and abhorred prisoners of war. That was logical and understandable, particularly for those who had lost a loved one in that conflict. In 1946, the prisoners were returned to their countries of origin, but the bond that had been created was not broken. Many of them, after returning to ruined Germany, maintained contact with American families, who even sent them packages of food and clothing to help them overcome the deprivations of the post-war period. Several thousand former prisoners returned to the United States, a country they had grown fond of, and obviously largely returned to marry the young women with whom they had started romantic relationships. Many others returned to reunite with the families who had taken them in, and even with the soldiers who managed the prison camps. Even many years later, in 2016, the German soldier Günter Graue, now 91 years old, visited the Fort Lewis camp, where he was a prisoner during World War II. There he met with retired General William Percival, who with the rank of major had been director of that camp.
Günter said, "My visit is only to thank the US military for the treatment they gave me and my compatriots. Although a prisoner, you made me proud to be a soldier."
Thank you, Günter. And I, the retired General Percival, only can add, you remind us today that it is the way you treat someone in a state of vulnerability, which really defines what you are worth as a person.